Hi everyone, welcome to After Podium. I have a guest from LA, and that's where I actually grew up and spent most of my childhood, is the Los Angeles area. And I have Maia Jasper White, who's an educator, violinist, writer. That's how I found out about her. And she's on Off the Podium through Skype. I've been going and doing this for a while, and most of my guests were on Skype, on the phone. And then there was a period, the past month or so, I've had a lot of guests that were either touring in Seattle or somehow were visiting Seattle. So I had a lot of guests on live in front of me. But Maia, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome up to Off the Podium.
Thank you.
All right, let's get started. Tell me a little bit about yourself, what you do in the LA area, and then we'll get to your career as a writer as well, because that's how I heard about you.
Sure. So I'm the co-founder and co-director of the Salastina Music Society. We're in our 8th season right now. We started in 2010 with one concert. In 2011, we did 3 concerts, and from 2012 and on, we've done 7 pairs of concerts, plus some additional, play with Sarah Chang and some festival somewhere, one-off kinds of events where we are hired out. So it's grown a lot, and right now we're in a place where we're pretty happy with the frequency of the programs we have. We're just trying to further grow the audience and, naturally the amount of money that we have to use. But we're very, very excited about and proud of the growth that the organization has enjoyed in the past few years. That being said, I make most of my living as a studio musician. And I also am the director of chamber music at Caltech. Believe it or not, it's a science school, kind of like MIT. But 10% of the student body is enrolled in chamber music.
Oh, wow.
I find it pretty staggering proportion. I think it really speaks to the kinship that science and music have had for hundreds and hundreds of years. And the level of the students is very wide. There are some graduate students who majored in music as undergrads, and then there are some people who just learned how to read music 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So very fun and humbling for me to work with people who are going to be the very dedicated audience members and philanthropists of the future.
Yeah.
And really, but at very different, varying levels. So I teach there, and also chamber music at the Colbert School. So that's kind of my life, directing Salastina, Caltech, the studios, and Colbert. In terms of writing, I've always really enjoyed that. I was one class shy of a double major in English in college. I wrote for the Yale Daily News, and I went to work for Charlie Rose.
Oh, wow.
The reporter from Business Insider called me before that story broke, and luckily I have nothing shady to report about that. But if I hadn't gone into music, I would have wanted to be a journalist. I really, really love long-form nonfiction writing. And it's been really fun in the past maybe year or 2 years to kind of use Salastina as a platform for expressing a lot of my views and opinions about music and culture, politics, and where all those things intersect. So that's been really a nice way to express also what Salastina is about and stands for, as well as me personally.
Perfect. Well, you speak so well, you write so well, you should definitely have a podcast. As you said, you were thinking about one. You should definitely have one. You speak really well. I love it. You talked about a little bit, sort of mentioned about the recent events, maybe Charlie Rose, and also in the music world, a lot of allegations, your feelings, your thoughts, and what's going on. And also an important thing is we always think of things that are bad or that have happened. Sometimes we think of it's in the past, the music directors or musicians or arts administrators that did some of these things are left behind. Does any of this happen now? Even if we don't know about them, or you don't even have to mention names if you do know some people of the present time, but does this happen now with current music directors, with the younger generation who feel so I sometimes look at the current generation of musicians and I feel so fortunate to live now, because I feel there are so many great, amazing musicians, talented people, and respectful people. Are there people like this that are within our current generation, or is that all in the past?
Oh my God, no. I think it continues to exist, and I think that I actually did write a pretty lengthy piece about Me Too and classical music, and that's what that piece that I wrote that was what got me in touch with you kind of came out of this one about Me Too, and my main thought about that is, and it's something that has been on my mind for all of my adult life, really, which is that, and I'd wanted to write about it for a really long time, and Me Too seemed like the right time, which is that there was a great disappointment that I felt as a young adult entering the professional field of music, where I had this expectation that being a musician somehow ennobled the soul. And not necessarily wrong, but it's also pretty naive. Meaning you're growing up and you have these mentors who are so charismatic. You're practicing this music that connects you to other people, another time and place. When you think of all the skills that are required to become a good musician, God, let me name a few. Some degree of self-awareness and criticism. So, you have to be aware that you're playing out of tune, or, being able to relate to another person's experience, be it the composer or the audience member or someone with whom you're playing chamber music. There are so many. So I just described self-awareness and empathy as being, you'd think that these are skills that would be prerequisites to being a great musician. And yet, as I grew older and had a lot of experiences with musicians who were pretty lousy people, but excellent players, I felt like this bucket of cold water had just been dumped all over my head, and I didn't know what to do with this conflict of, how much I had fetishized really what music can do for someone. And certainly I felt that doing music had made me a better person. So it stood to reason that maybe it would do the same thing for everybody else. And especially, if you're good, and as I wrote about, every time Yo-Yo Ma comes to town, someone inevitably remarks on how wonderful a person he is. That somehow these two things are intrinsically intertwined. And we really desperately want to believe that. So it's very heartbreaking and confusing when really, really gifted musicians act in really disturbing ways. So to me, Me Too was kind of like, okay, Harvey Weinstein, the idea of the Hollywood casting couch, that's not news. And CK, neither is the idea that comedians have a dark side. And yet, James Levine, I will totally say, on the record, I had absolutely heard rumors about him for 20 years. People whose a string player friend who had an older brother, and their dad was in the Met Opera Chorus, and he forbade their son from showing up at rehearsals in the 90s. This is something that was swirling around, and yet we're all kind of dismayed in this unique way when a great artist, capital G, capital A, behaves in a way like this. It's not surprising for Harvey Weinstein, not really even surprising for Louis C.K. That's to say nothing of an athlete like Kobe Bryant, and yet somehow when it's James Levine, oh my God, how is this possible? So my point in all of this was, there's something that all those people have in common, which is that they're human beings. And one thing that stayed with me from a recent issue of the New Yorker, there's a wonderful, wonderful piece by Paul Bloom, who's actually a professor of psychology at Yale. And incidentally, there's a fantastic iTunes U course that you can eavesdrop at Yale's Psychology 101 with Paul Bloom. It's fantastic. But he said that, there's something very naive about this assumption that people who act in antisocial, unkind, aggressive, and violent ways are simply confused. Maybe they just don't get something. They don't understand that other people have their own inner experiences and that the way that you're treating them might be awful and traumatic. And his point was, actually, when people are cruel to others, it comes from the same place that empathy does. It comes precisely from knowing that someone else is human.
Wow.
And instead of feeling compassion, you're lording over power.
Wow.
So, to try to separate that, it comes from our confusion of, no, how is this possible that someone could, they just must be crazy, is like shorthand, or confused about there's like a chip missing. And Paul Bloom's point is, no, there's not.
Wow.
They're actually just, so this idea that profound beauty and very incomprehensible cruelty can actually come from the exact same place is quite sobering. So then, of course, the question is what to do with that.
Yeah.
To me, there's a lot of people who say, okay, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, and let's not boycott a James Levine recording, because let's not forget that so many wonderful other people worked on those things. And I think that's a very valid and compelling argument. For me personally, I'm just done.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's interesting. And I also have one big fear, which is I love these certain conductors or musicians, artists, violinists, and I am always afraid to meet them. And I always tell this to my wife. Someone comes into town or someone plays, and I'm like, afterwards, I do not want to meet this person. I'm just afraid they'll say or do something that will conflict with all the passion and love that I have for this person. And so I'm always afraid to meet some of the people that really inspire me because of just fear of disappointment, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, the pedestal effect, might be compromised.
It's tough, but we talk about all these things, and I wish we have a lot of great musicians and passionate people in the arts, but I just wish more of them were a little bit more outspoken, maybe through articles and other things. And to mention to the listeners, I'll definitely post the blog site and the Salastina site, but the two articles you were talking about, one was the Rude Awakening, which I read, which was Rude Awakenings, which was great, and also the Eyes Wide Shut. So both of those are great. Please check them out. What can we do as musicians to be more outspoken, but not just outspoken? What can we do to make a difference? Maybe through articles, I don't know, going out and doing something. What are we not doing? What can we do more of?
Yeah, well, that's a really, really good question. There are so many ways that I can think of to answer that. I'll try to be concise and not leave too many hanging threads. I think that the very, very at the top of that list is to reconsider this idea that art transforms. Mm-hmm. I think that we have fetishized that a lot, and it's come at a really, really great cost. And by that, I mean not just, this idea that it's so important for your orchestra to have Charles Dutoit come, even though you know the risks involved. Oh, because it makes us seem so glossy compared to all the other glossy orchestras. Yeah. Oh, and it doesn't matter that he's so much more expensive than that young conductor who's a woman or a person of color and very, very good and charismatic. Charles Dutoit is just going to sell more tickets, and that's more important than anything else. Yeah. I think that is something that fundamentally needs to be re-examined. Yeah. That's just what I would call mirror time. Time to look at the mirror. Like, what are your priorities and actions telling you you value, and what does it tell everyone else you value? When this field is trying so desperately to be relevant, and when you fetishize art and artists and give them these free passes at the expense of common decency and furthering social agendas that have a lot of value, what message are you actually sending to people who might feel alienated by the music culture? Mm-hmm. It's really important to put your money where your mouth is. Yeah. And if you put your money in engaging a world famous name brand conductor, that's just, sadly, I think the field has relied too heavily on marketing this exact fetishization that I've been talking about. It's playing into the idea of the artist as this remote, unreachable, superhuman God, and therefore that person can get away with anything. And I think that we would really do well to consider the reality that music was fundamentally something that was born out of a pro-social desire to commune with other people in very everyday ways. Funerals, weddings, sitting around campfires, and gradually over the, most recent 300-400 years, even Baroque music was more about dancing and religion. We're talking like pretty recent past for humans in music, and it's become this kind of lofty, sanctified thing. And I'm not saying that's all wrong. It's just, re-examine what the cost of that is. So that's the first thing. And I think that a lot of anything else I'd have to say about what musicians can do comes out of that. So, even when you think about that on the individual level, any change is made based on individuals adjusting their collective values and having the courage to share that with other people, because that's how things gain traction and momentum, is feeling like, you're not differentiating yourself socially from your group. That's just human nature. But I think that at this point, we're seeing that being leveraged in profound and effective, meaningful, pro-social ways. And I think that's fabulous. But insofar as that pertains to music, just this idea, for instance, that auditions should be blind.
Yeah, and that's where I wanted to go with this. Your article. Go for it. This is great.
Okay, so I'm sitting around thinking, like, how long in my life have I operated on the assumption that how you sound is all that matters? I've taken this as a matter of course. It's how I've taught my students. I've explained this premise so many times that, most explicitly to students I have who are going to college, for instance, and they're so concerned about, am I going to get into Juilliard or Curtis? And if it's not one of those, then I'm screwed. And I just kind of fold my hands in my lap and I tell them, honey, do you know how many people I have beaten in auditions who went to Juilliard? Because behind the screen, it doesn't matter. That being said, how many people from Juilliard have beaten me behind the screen? A lot. But it goes both ways, in other words. So I would describe this screen process as this great equalizer. And, I started to realize that, hold on, it plays into this idea that sound is the only quality that matters. And at this point in my career, combined with this point in what's going on socially and culturally, looking around me with a bit of fresh eyes, like, wait a minute, James Levine, Chanel Dutois, all these guys sound pretty great, but really, is that all that matters? I don't know. So it got me down this rabbit hole of, actually, in every orchestra I've ever been in, there's a pretty healthy amount of dysfunction. People don't get along. Imagine if there was an interview process to vet how much of a team player someone is. Imagine if an orchestral musician had to, as part of their job application, give a lesson in front of a panel to an underprivileged child. Imagine if a musician had to do a little bit of public speaking because audiences really want to hear from musicians. But if you're like, I just want to show up and play and go home. That's what our culture is now. And I think that, and we're shocked that we're fighting so hard to be relevant. How is this, you just isolated this one, and it's interesting, Tigran, because when I posted this story, and I have to call out many of my older colleagues because a lot of their reactions were, well, blind auditions are really the only way to assess whether we just aren't involved enough yet, blah, blah. And, I think that there's a lot of their responses betrayed exactly what I was complaining about, which is this assumption that all that matters is how you sound.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I was trying to point out. Like, maybe to re-energize the field and make it a bit more healthy. And have I said relevant yet? To other people, you have to consider, sound good. And, there's a lot of, it's a cognitive dissonance, or distortion, rather, a very profound cognitive distortion to have read what I had to say as all or nothing.
Yeah.
A lot of people read my piece and were like, what? So you're saying how you sound doesn't matter? Hold on.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that at all.
Yeah.
I'm saying there's room for how you sound and other things. So, for instance, to say that you have to hire Charles Dutoit means that that's all that matters, and that there's not somebody else who could sound good and bring other people to the table, such as not take advantage of other musicians in the orchestra, maybe be from a diverse background that would appeal to a lot of different kinds of people, and just have any number of other unnamed or unforeseen skills, like, wonderfully well-spoken in public, great sense of humor, really captivating style. Think of someone like Yuja Wang, lover or hater. I think there's a great example of someone who sounds good and, speaks to a lot of other interests and is compelling and quite literally attractive to people. And historically, also not that long ago, when I was a child, I was obsessed with Aunt Sophie Mutter, and so many old guys were like, she just likes to wear her strapless dresses. Come on, get over yourself. Are you serious? You're really going to you have to be a beautiful person to be a soloist now. Okay, look at the rest of the world. Isn't it possible that they could be attractive and sound good? Sorry if that makes you feel left out.
Yeah. Well, with Yuja Wang, actually, she's great. But every once in a while, you'll still get a reporter or article that comes out and talks more about the way she looked than about how she played or what she did for the organization or for the orchestra. Or so it's.
I'm tired of the pearl clutching.
Yeah.
Dios mío, she wear this today. Good grief, just that. Think about why you're so distressed by that.
Yeah.
That's a much more interesting thing to write about if you really want to write Yuja Wang's clothes.
Yeah.
Rather than just to report on what it was. But another example of sound good and is Gustavo Dudamel.
Yeah.
Here's someone who is so gifted, but I think the LA Phil hiring him was the most genius artistic and social and entrepreneurial decision that they could have made, because very, very heavily Latino area.
Yeah.
He's charismatic, delightful, manages to kind of in that Venn diagram of this kind of lofty, unreachable artist and the more like diverse, approachable, interesting guy. Like, we're talking about this overlap that is miraculously appealing to lots of people. And I think that is definitely the way I would love to see this ship of music kind of steered. Is like, sound good and Mozart in the Jungle, an entire character based on this persona that he identifies or kind of encapsulates. And I think that, that is a great, in the article I wrote about, like, who even knows the ripple effects that having a kind of mindset or values shift towards more what I'm talking about, we cannot predict the effect that would have to move away from like, you sound just what matters, and to have a more holistic and relevant assessment of people and musicians. Mozart in the Jungle is a great example of something that's like, could you even make that up? Like, you hire this Latino dynamic conductor, and now we're going to have this #1 hit show on Amazon that's about exactly this. Like, who could have foreseen something like that? So that's exactly what I'm talking about, this kind of dynamism and relevancy that we can't predict, that is born of just having a bit more clear-sightedness around what you can get out of different kinds of people and musicians. And really putting your money where your mouth is about what you truly value in music. If what you value is connecting with other people and being great, there are a lot of changes you can make.
And LA Phil, I must say, it's an orchestra I'm truly proud of, because I grew up in LA and I listen to LA Phil a lot, and I'm really proud of that orchestra, because it really is doing a lot of great things, and Gustavo Dudamel, being the music director, does a lot of fantastic things. So the youth orchestra programs that he's worked with, just a diverse program, always including women and people of color, and just such a diverse program. It's truly a unique orchestra in the world of classical music, and the States, definitely, for sure. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the diversity in the classical music world. Is what can we do as musicians? Because it seems like, as I said before, I talk to all these musicians, they're fantastic people, and they're all about diversity. I talk to music directors, they really care. So what's going wrong? Where is this? Because the only thing that I've come up with in my head is that the arts administrators are preventing some of these music directors and some of these musicians to carry out the things that they want to carry out. Is that correct? Because unless these music directors and musicians, they just like to talk and they actually don't do anything behind the doors, I don't know what to think, because every musician I've talked to, they're so passionate about diversity and equality and all these things, but then it doesn't come out in the programs. The major symphonies still don't program enough women composers, and they don't bring enough women conductors in to conduct. So what can we do? I mean, what's happening?
Gosh, well, okay, I think that yes, I do think that administrations are understandably risk averse. It's hard enough to keep classical treatment. I say that as someone who runs one. For instance, we just had this past weekend a program that I am so proud of. It was curated by our resident host, Brian Lauritsen, who's a real influencer in this department. I actually recommend you have him on as a guest too. But he put together a program for us that we called Brian's Living Playlist, because he's KUSC, it's our classical station. He's a DJ on that, and we thought it would be fun to have him treat us like a jukebox and put together his dream chamber music program. And it was half composed by women and 40% people of color. And his point was, I'm not doing this to toot my own horn. I just want to show that it's not that hard, But my point in all this is that our audience attendance, we promoted so many different angles of this, and Saturday night's concert was our emptiest, and that's a tragic reality for the administrators, I think, is that when you're trying to program a concert, that certain things are going to sell and go over well with donors. And sadly, that's what we rely on, so gosh, how to fix that? Wow, I think that's a very long road. Or a long game, rather. You have to really have faith and play the long game. So, there was also, if maybe your listeners or you're familiar with Hidden Brain, it's a wonderful podcast. I love that. They had one on recently that I was just stunned by. It was called Why Now? And it was about, essentially all these things have been happening to women for decades. And so why now? Like, what happened now? And they really succeeded in answering the question, I felt. And at risk of going on too much of a tangent, they basically used a well-known playwright named Israel Horovitz, who was repeatedly accused of sexual assault and transgressions and harassment throughout the 80s and 90s. But it was only last year that he was kind of taken down by it. And so they kind of used him to illustrate the point of why it finally worked now, when his strategies and behavior had remained remarkably consistent for basically 30 years. And the answer, kind of, if I could try to sum it up, it was that it all comes down to kind of what's going on in the society.
Yeah.
So I remain pretty hopeful that, like you said, if musicians are really kind of getting on this bandwagon, it's only a matter of time before the momentum shifts to the audiences and the donors. And in a way, maybe the musicians can leverage that very thing I've been decrying about, how musicians are so lofty and wonderful and elevated, and kind of use that mystique, to convince the donors and the administration that this is a good idea.
Yeah.
Leverage that.
Yeah.
You think we're exotic zoo animals? Okay, this is what exotic zoo animal wants now.
Yeah.
So kind of use it for the good. In other words, I think that the LA Phil's success, it's only a matter of time before other people start copying them.
Yeah.
Imitation is the highest form of flattery,
That's true.
after all. So I think that we are kind of at the tipping point. I think that that phrase that about imitation and flattery, it has a bit of a kind of zany quality, like it's so uncreative, but you do that. It sounds a bit condescending.
Yeah.
But I actually really encourage people to look around them, and I do this too. Look around you and see what works and what sticks,
Yeah.
and what doesn't, and why. And I think for me, when I think of maybe why this concert that I was just talking about for Salastina wasn't so successful, I have so many friends and audience members who are obviously LA, very liberal town, would claim the support, this premise, but don't really feel like it today.
Yeah.
So this is a reality that we're up against too, is that it's very human and social to want to chime in and jump on bandwagons that make you feel like you're winning the empathy Olympics, as one of my friends, great composer Derek Spiva, who said his grandfather would talk about the empathy Olympics. That's kind of what being a liberal is all about. It's like, competing with your friends for like who's more compassionate and woke. But I think, that's getting audience members to put their money where their mouth is too. It's incumbent on presenters and fundraisers and marketers to tap into what's emotionally hooky about diversity. So I think that's something that musicians can do, is sit with what is actually going to get people to act. Like, you have to play to people's emotions, not just their ideas or ideals.
Yeah.
So for instance, when we did our end of year fundraising appeal, I tried something different this year, and it was pretty effective. It was, why donate to Salastina? Because living your values feels good. Period. End of story.
Yeah.
So, I think those are some pretty tangible things we can do. It all starts with thought. So just think about what matters besides sound, and then think about what you can act on to bring those things to life that matter.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, think of putting yourself in the administration's shoes and in the audience's shoes, and what emotionally is going to appeal to both of those groups about what matters to you.
Yeah.
To kind of be an advocate and an ambassador.
Yeah.
When I think about, this idea of blind auditions too, like, to me, what makes for the best musician, period, whether it's a teacher, a soloist, an orchestral musician, a chamber musician, at this point, it's to be an advocate.
Yeah.
And that means you have to sound good. I can't say that enough times. Don't get me wrong. You have to teach good, you have to sound good, but you also need to have so many other skills that will make you a good, compelling, effective advocate for the art. So
one more point, and I'll let you go. I've taken too much of your time now. But diversity and how we have people of color or just women musicians involved in all of this. The one thing that you also briefly talked about in one of your articles was how expensive classical music is in some of these master classes. And so it makes me think about, I see a lot of black musicians, people of color in entertainment and pop culture and jazz. But when it comes to classical music, they're not there. I look at the sports and I see a lot of black athletes in NFL and NBA, but I don't see them in sports that are a little bit more expensive, like tennis and golf, because those sports actually require a lot more financing, a lot more money to participate in. So that's a big thing in classical music and I don't know how to approach this, and LA Phil has done a wonderful job, and there are many other organizations that do programs where it helps musicians who are not so privileged as far as finances to have an opportunity to study with great musicians and have access to all these great classical concerts. But not every city has this. So how do we approach this? Because it's one thing to have these programs, as you mentioned, there's these residency programs where they say, okay, you'll have 1 year appointment as a person of color or whatever, and you talked about this, but it's another thing to actually go deep and really make a difference. And so we have a lot more diversity in classical music, and finances are no longer a problem. And this is a big question. I know it's tough, but some of your thoughts maybe.
Okay. Well, yes, as you mentioned, this idea of, oh, let's have a residency for a person of color, and it's a year, and you sit there, and it makes all of we feel good, like we're doing something, but good luck behind the screen audition.
Yeah.
So I think that, again, if you're looking for advocates, you might consider some affirmative action, at work. So I think that's one thing. But, of course, it starts so much younger. So that's, part of what is sad to me about these residency programs for older musicians of color is that they seem to do so little so late. And I think that, like you said, fewer black athletes in the expensive sports, it's exactly the same with music, because, it's hard to get a scholarship to study with the best violin teacher when you just started.
Yeah.
Nobody gets a scholarship when you're a beginner. You need money to pay for lessons initially, and to even get to the place where you can show aptitude, talent, discipline, and hard work.
Yeah.
So I think, Colburn, the pre-college where I teach, they have a wonderful community program which has a different faculty. I don't work with these kids. I think that down the road it might be nice to give this group of kids a little more access to the rest of the faculty at Colburn. But at least it's a very, very good start. It's an excellent faculty that they have working with the more underprivileged population of kids. But I love just seeing them in the school wandering around like they own the place, because that's, I think, what a lot of it comes down to is even just hearing the other kids practice, seeing the concerts, knowing what's going on, feeling like it's a place where they belong.
Yeah.
I think that's a really, really great idea for a lot. So, I have no solution for, the questions that you asked, but both reconsidering blind auditions to include some element of affirmative action, of course, preserving qualification and sound, but, if you really want to change the makeup of your orchestras, you have to start earlier and now.
Yeah.
So, because otherwise you're waiting 20 years from now until you get more people of color in your orchestras. So again, I have to call out my older colleagues for not being willing to kind of go, well, with getting a more diverse orchestra, that starts, when you're so young. Yes, you're right. And that means you have to wait a pretty long time. And I think we're past waiting now. So that's kind of all I would have to say about that for now. I think that, in a way too, YouTube is a great educational resource. It's I sometimes feel that even my more affluent students are playing at a really high level, partially inspired by watching YouTube videos obsessively. And I think that's a good thing that there's free access, relatively free access to content. That's maybe something that can be exploited a bit more.
Two more quick questions,
Sure.
not so musical. What
Yeah.
inspires you, and what's next for you?
Oh God. I would say what inspires me is definitely other people, hands down. So whether it's composer friends, dead composers, my chamber collaborators, my husband who's a composer,
Oh, okay.
my students, even the amateurs, sometimes especially the amateurs,
Oh.
but my really, really gifted college-bound music students, the ones who are so earnest and sincere. So yeah, other people, even audience members. Last night in the concert, we were playing this wonderful quartet by Aaron J. Kernis, and we have this membership program. And a wonderful member that we have, Deborah, was sitting in the front row, and the Kernis was so hard, and we had practiced it a lot. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw her just like swooning in reverie, and it gave me goosebumps just like to see her reaction. So other people through and through. What inspires me, that's that. And what's next? Oh boy. Well, we have another program coming up that's called Second Class Citizens, and it's pretty related to what we've been talking about. It's about why some composers never achieved the fame they deserved, or at least that I think they deserved. Kind of inspired by, I was driving along listening to the radio, and I heard this piano trio that I thought was lovely. And I thought, wow, it sounds like Beethoven, but if it were Beethoven, I'd know it. We just performed all of them last year. And so I thought, God, what is this? And it was Piano Trio in G major by Johann Nepomuk Hummel.
Wow, yeah.
And I was like, who the hell is that? I remember hearing a Hummel trumpet.
Yeah, that's right. Me too. Yeah.
A camp that I taught at once, and it was fine, So I thought, gosh, this poor guy. I looked him up, totally overshadowed by Beethoven.
Yeah.
And then I thought, there are any number of reasons composers don't achieve the fame they deserve. Female, black, Jewish, politically provocative, bad luck.
Yeah.
And then nobody knows.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a very compelling theme for a concert. And the thing I'm most excited about for that one was, you may have heard that last year, a musicologist from Duke discovered that a piano sonata long attributed to Felix Mendelssohn had in fact been written by his sister Fanny.
Yeah.
So we're doing the West Coast premiere under her name of the Easter Sonata on Easter.
Wow.
With a wonderful pianist named Hyejin Kim performing. So that's something I'm very, very excited about, to think that this is a piece that it's at F. Mendelssohn and it's good, so it must be by Felix. These are the assumptions that we make. Doesn't it sound so masculine? It's absurd. He willfully took credit for his sister's work.
Yeah.
And I love Mendelssohn.
Yeah.
In fact, I think, as far as composers go, one of the more normal human beings that he has. I think he had a stroke when he was 38 years old. He's a pretty stressed out guy, but even so, he loved his wife and was good to his children and hardworking guy. But at the time, nothing wrong with taking credit for your sister's work. She didn't really have a problem with it either. It's just fascinating. So, 150 years later, here we are, doing Hummel and Martineau, Ionesco. Ionesco, an example of someone who is better known as a teacher.
Yeah.
Fantastic composer. Yeah. I think Rachmaninoff and Izai come to mind in that category too. Yeah. People who were players and teachers, and somehow that eclipsed the amazing music that they wrote. Rachmaninoff is one of my favorite composers. Yeah. The guy's a brilliant pianist, and the papers didn't like a lot of the things that he wrote at first. So he's not held up in the same way that Stravinsky or Debussy is. Yeah. Anyway, so that's basically what's next. We also have a young artist playing with us on that concert piano quartet of Fanny Mendelssohn. She's one of my Colburn students and one of our, we call it Sounds Promising Young Artists. That's a program where we try to give young musicians the tools that we think they need to succeed as 21st century musicians. So, yeah, so that's March 31st and April 1st. And in the meantime, just teaching and playing on movies.
Well, thank you so much. Anything that you wanted to talk about and we didn't get to? There's many things, but anything that comes to mind that you wanted to just say before we leave here?
Not at all. Just thanks for doing what you do.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your questions and keep it up.
Thank you so much. Have a beautiful day.
You as well. Bye, Tigran.